There's a wonderful little story, a wisdom story from the Zen Buddhist tradition. But in order to glean the wisdom from this story, you have to be awake, alert, attentive from the get-go, or else the insight that this story holds out on offer to us, it'll just slip right through your fingers. And even if you are awake and alert and attentive, you will still probably fail to grasp its wisdom. So I invite you, let your mind be immersed in this story already from the very first syllable. For as in all things, wisdom comes and goes like a flash, just like that. So do you think you're ready? Do you think you have the ears to hear? Let's find out, shall we? A monk once said to his master, "I am poor and destitute. I beg of you, master, please help me. Help make me rich." The master's only response to this request was to call the monk by name, to which the monk replied, "Yes, master?" Then the master said this, "Having tasted 3 cups of the best wine, do you still say that your lips are not yet moistened?" Yeah, that's the end of the story. So, do you get it? Have you reached enlightenment yet? Probably not, right? Like I said, the wisdom of this story, it comes and it goes like a flash. Like the monk, we had 3 opportunities to grab a hold of wisdom, to have our aha moment, to have the light bulb go off. But by the end, we find, like the monk, that our lips are still parched. So let's circle back around to the beginning and walk through the story once more, shall we? Perhaps this time we'll see the wisdom that it holds out to us. So the monk, he says that he is poor and destitute, and he begs his master to make him rich. Now, he's not talking about a literal poverty here. He's not complaining that he has no money. That's not the issue. He's talking about inner poverty. To put it in Jesus' words, he is acknowledging that he is poor in spirit, and he wants to know what his master can do for somebody who is so poor in spirit. And if only he could become rich in spirit, then he will be happy, or so he thinks. And he doesn't realize that his acknowledgement of his inner poverty, this self-awareness, this is actually the first taste of the best wine. He's got something going for him in this state of self-awareness, right? And his willingness to be open and transparent and not hypocritical about all of this with his master, this is the second taste. He's really got something going for him now, but he can't see it. And the third taste of the best wine is his willingness to learn, to not just admit that he has inner poverty, but his willingness to learn from his master about how he might become rich in spirit. This is the third taste. But the master concludes by wondering why the monk still feels so parched. After all, this monk has enough self-awareness to see his inner poverty. He has enough humility to talk about it in a genuine and open way with his master. And he has enough wisdom to know that he doesn't know everything, that somebody else could help him and teach him. He's truly open to the world around him. He's proven in the very conversation that he's not trapped by his own ego. Like, what else could you possibly expect to gain, my friend? How can you call all of these virtues that you've just exhibited in the conversation inner poverty? I mean, the master's saying, dear monk, you are self-aware, you are humble, you are wise, you are not tethered to your ego. Your openness about your inner poverty, this is richness of spirit. The thing that you are looking for is the very thing that you've had all along. You've been gulping down the best wine all of this time. Why do you come to me? That's the point that the master is trying to make. How can you say that you're still so thirsty? This little wisdom story, it reminds me of one of Andy Bernard's last lines from the very last episode of The Office, the TV series. As the series wraps up and comes to a close, most everyone who used to work in the office has now moved on to bigger and better things in life. Most of them have landed their dream jobs, or at the very least, they have landed more ideal situations in life. They have a happy ending to their stories, right? They finally have that thing that they've been working so hard for so many years. But the series ends with a lot of irony. So before all of their dreams came true, and while they were still working together in the office, most of them, like many office workers, were pretty miserable. They didn't really like their jobs. Working in this office, it was pretty mundane and unfulfilling. And they found their boss, Michael Scott, to be extremely annoying and irritating. Most could not wait to get out of there. To put it in one character's words, after he watched somebody quit during the series, he says, "I love a good quitting story. It makes me feel like I have control over my own life. It gives me hope. Maybe I'll have one of my own someday." But I dream. While these people were there in the office, most of them were dreaming about not being in the office, but about being somewhere else. But it's ironic. By the end of the series, in the final episode, there's a scene where Andy Bernard is reflecting back on his time in the office. And even though he has now landed his dream gig, the thing that he always imagined would make him so happy, he suddenly finds himself deeply missing his time in the office. He misses his coworkers and all of the experiences that he shared with them. And he realizes that he didn't make the most out of that season while he was still in it. And he concludes by saying this. He says, "I wish there was a way to know that you're in the good old days before you've actually left them." He realized back then, even though all of those years in the office, they were less than ideal for him, those were the good old days. He just couldn't see them for what they were. He couldn't wake up to the goodness of those days while he was in the midst of them. This is precisely the point that the Zen master was trying to drive home to the monk. You are already in the good old days. You are already where you want to be. Wake up. Don't let the good old days pass you by. The fact that you are self-aware and humble and wise and not enslaved to your ego in this very moment, in this very conversation, proves that you already have everything that you could ever need in life. It proves that you are already rich in spirit. Happiness can only ever be found in this present moment. If you have this present moment, if you are awake to it, you have all of the conditions necessary for happiness. But most of us think this way, do we not? If only I had more money, more stability, well, then I would be truly happy. If only I had less things to weep about, to be anxious about, then I would be really happy. If only more people liked me. If only I had more YouTube likes, right? Or Facebook likes. If only more people liked me. If only I were more popular, then I would be very deeply happy. But Jesus tells us this morning in his wisdom teaching about happiness, that happiness or blessedness, the two mean the same thing in Jesus' mind. Happiness, it's not the absence of poverty. Happiness is not the absence of hunger. It's not the absence of suffering. It's not the absence of loneliness. Happiness is not the absence of difficulty. Nor, for Jesus, is happiness synonymous with the presence of abundant wealth, or overflowing refrigerators, or a life filled with laughter. Nor is happiness synonymous with fame and popularity. In our reading for today, Jesus actually calls those who are poor, hungry, broken, and destitute and oppressed happy, because they are closer to the truth than those people who are rich, well-fed, shallow, and popular. Why? Here's why. Because the person who can find happiness in the midst of suffering, they've found everything. What else could you possibly need if you've discovered that? Like if you get to the place in life, the point in life where suffering and difficulty cannot snuff out your happiness, to take your joy away, then you pretty much have this life figured out, right? You know that regardless of what life throws at you, the good old days are never going to leave you because you're going to carry them around with you wherever you go. The good old days are not external circumstances, but the internal life that you have cultivated, right? And you know what it means to taste the best wine always, because you know what it means to discover the true self in every situation. And you understand that things like wealth and comfort and peace cannot contribute a single thing to your happiness, nor can the absence of these things take anything away from your happiness. So you've stopped looking for happiness outside of this present moment, for you found it in this present moment. You are awake to it in this present moment, and you've stopped looking for someone or something else to fix the inner poverty that you feel. Rather, you've embraced your inner poverty as if it were your greatest treasure, because it is. And you realize that even if you have nothing, you still have everything. Whereas other people, they may think that they have everything, like money and power and fame. But the reality is they have nothing. So in other words, if you want to be happy, stop trying to be happy. For happiness is this present moment. In this present moment, even if it is less than ideal and it's full of suffering, you are still alive, questioning, listening, responding, breathing. What else could you ever possibly need than this? You are rich, rich beyond measure. Happiness is not the evasion of suffering, my friends, but the acceptance of it. Happiness is not about repressing pain. It's about accepting it, leaning into it. For all of life is the cross. And if you spend your entire life trying to avoid the cross, if you never pick up that cross, you will never know what it means to walk out of that empty tomb. You will never experience resurrection. The only way out of your empty tomb is through your cross. The only way through the valley of the shadow of death is through it, not around it. Jesus says, happy or blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Happy are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Happy are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Now, most people, I think, whenever they interpret these little sayings of Jesus, they say something like this. They think something like this. Yeah, even if you're poor right now, or hungry right now, or devastated, broken right now, that's okay. You know why? Because whenever you get to heaven someday, well, then you'll be truly happy. But this is not what Jesus is saying. He's not saying that. He's not saying that we will discover happiness someday. We just need to wait out all of the sucky parts in the meantime. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that everything that we need to be truly happy is already present in the here and now. We don't become happy by ignoring our poverty or our hunger or our brokenness. No, we discover our happiness by accepting these things, by accepting the hand that has been dealt to us in life. And sure, like none of us want to suffer, right? We don't want to have lives full of suffering. But we don't seem to realize that we actually inflict more suffering upon ourselves whenever we try to avoid suffering. For example, it's never pleasant at all to think about death. But if we spend our entire lives avoiding the thought of death, hiding from death, it's only going to cause us more suffering in the end. We have to grapple with the reality of it. So my friends, do you want to know what true happiness is? Happiness is the understanding that the evasion of suffering is the greatest form of suffering that there is. The happy person chooses not to evade suffering anymore, but leans into it, understands the joy of the cross. But so many of us are just like the monk in that Zen story. We pray to our Master Jesus and we ask him to take our inner poverty away. We ask him to make us into better versions of ourselves, richer versions of ourselves, less broken versions of ourselves. But little do we realize that we have just taken giant gulps of wine. The fact that we're acknowledging our inner poverty before our Master and that we're open to his healing touch shows that we truly are rich in spirit. And we will stop walking away from prayer so parched if we can learn to let ourselves be exactly who we are in the moment and where we are in the moment. For you are already living in the good old days right now, in this very moment, in this very second, my friends. Wake up to them. Wake up to them. Or else wisdom will pass you by and happiness will pass you by, just like the insight of that Zen story passed you by upon the first reading of it.